Tank Dempsey doesn't remember his own capture. He is loud, sarcastic, and quotable, but underneath the bravado, he's a soldier whose memories were erased after his body was used as a science experiment. Eventually, he has to look his old self in the eyes and end him, and he won't be the last one forced to do it. Tank Dempsey. He is the loudest, dumbest, most quotable meathead in the entire Zombies cast, and he is also the first victim in a story that eventually breaks every single one of these guys in half. That is the part nobody clocks on a first playthrough. You hear the one-liners, the screaming about punching Nazis, the sheer joy this man takes in violence, and you file him under comic relief. Marines are supposed to be simple. Dempsey plays it up so hard, so constantly, so loudly, that you stop asking why he is actually there. You just laugh, reload, and move on to the next room full of zombies without ever wondering what is actually going on behind the screaming. Corporal Tank Dempsey first shows up in Verrückt back in 2009, sent into Wittenau Sanatorium in Berlin with a Marine squad on a straightforward extraction job. Grab OSS spy Peter McCain. Get out. Standard stuff, at least on paper. The kind of mission a guy like Dempsey could probably do in his sleep. The kind of job that should have ended with a debrief and a beer instead of what actually happened to him. It does not go that way. It never goes that way. Dempsey gets captured by Group 935 right there at Verrückt, and this is where the joke character quietly stops being a joke. He becomes subject 4, not a nickname, not a call sign, a designation, the kind you get when the people holding you stop thinking of you as a person. Group 935 pumps him full of Element 115 exposure over and over, and it does not just make him tougher or crazier, it wipes his memory. Every fragmented flashback, every line about not remembering his own past, that is not a writing quirk. That is a documented side effect of what was done to him in a lab, logged and repeated across the story like a scar that never fully closes. So the guy cracking jokes about being an American hero is underneath it a man who does not actually know who he used to be. He is improvising a personality on top of a wound, and he is doing it loud enough that nobody, including maybe himself, notices the gap underneath. That is the whole trick of Dempsey as a character. The volume is not confidence, the volume is cover. Nothing in canon confirms he has a daughter named anything at all, but follow the pattern anyway. One offhand, non-canon mention puts an unnamed 5-year-old girl somewhere in his past, and that thin thread is enough to make the swagger read differently. A man built entirely out of bravado, maybe quietly gutted by a relationship he never talks about, never references, never lets slip even once in the middle of all that screaming. That is not subtext anymore once you notice it, even if the girl herself barely exists on paper. She is a rumor with a 5-year-old face, and Dempsey carries her like a ghost he refuses to name, propping up every joke on top of a silence he never breaks. And then Der Eisendrache happens, and the mask comes all the way off. Primus Dempsey stands in front of a cryo chamber holding his own Ultimus self, and he has to kill him. Not a zombie, not a monster, him. The tough guy Marine, the one who never shuts up, the one who has an answer for everything, goes dead silent for that scene, visibly shaken in a way none of his one-liners prepared you for. No joke, no punchline. Just a man staring at himself and deciding to end it, because that is apparently what growth looks like when Element 115 is involved. That is the blueprint this entire series keeps repeating. A soldier who thinks he is fighting the undead eventually finds out the real enemy was whoever put him in that chamber in the first place, and the only way out is putting down the man he used to be. Not defeating him, not saving him. Ending him, personally, with his own hands, then picking his gun back up and heading into the next room like it did not just happen. Dempsey is just the first one dumb enough, or maybe honest enough, to make jokes about it the whole way there, right up until the exact moment the jokes stop working. Everyone after him gets the same deal in a different flavor. He just happened to go first, screaming the entire way down. But at least Dempsey only lost his memories. The next man on the crew lost something he could count, one funeral at a time, and he drowned every single one of them. Nikolai Belinsky. Nikolai Belinsky has been married 9 times, and every single wife is dead. Sit with that for a second before you laugh, because the game wants you to laugh first and flinch second. Shir no Numa is where most players officially meet him, a Red Army soldier who was already playable back in Verrückt, and within a few lines of dialogue, he is cracking jokes about burying another wife. 9 of them, sometimes 8, depending on which map and which timeline you catch him in, and the causes of death range from execution to war to accidents so vague they might as well be punchlines. It plays like the world's darkest running gag, repeated so often it stops sounding like tragedy and starts sounding like a bit. A man who has lost that many people and responds by pouring another vodka and grinning about it, like grief is just something that happens to other men, never to him. That grin is the whole trick. Nikolai's drinking gets treated as comic relief for years. He slurs his lines, he toasts to nothing in particular, he treats mass undead outbreaks like a mild inconvenience squeezed between drinks. But the deeper story intel makes it clear his alcoholism is not a character quirk. It is a coping mechanism for a man who watched his country burn and buried wife after wife along the way, one funeral at a time until the funeral stopped meaning anything at all. He is not funny because he is careless. He is funny because falling apart quietly was never an option for a Soviet officer, so he built a performance instead, and the performance is a man who has stopped caring, so he does not have to feel anything at all. 9 dead wives, and not one real tear on camera. That is the performance working exactly as designed, night after night, drink after drink. That is the same rot eating through this entire crew. One soldier gets his memory erased, so he never has to confront what was done to him. Another builds a mask out of liquor and one-liners, so he never has to confront what he lost. Different defense, same wound, same architect standing behind the curtain, pulling the strings on all of it, watching his puppets cope in whatever way keeps them functional. Gorod Krovi is where the mask comes off, and it does not come off gently. Set in the ruins of Stalingrad, the map puts Primus Nikolai face to face with his own Ultimus counterpart, the drunk nihilistic version of himself who never stopped laughing at his own graveyard. And Ultimus Nikolai kills him. Not metaphorically, not off-screen, not implied through some cutscene you have to squint at. The drunk, laughing version of Nikolai looks at the sober, guilt-ridden man he could have become and puts him down first, like the joke could not survive being witnessed by something that took the graveyard seriously. Think about what that actually requires from the crew watching it happen. You have to know, completely and without denial, that the funny drunk routine was never funny. You have to admit that every toast was a eulogy wearing a costume, every punchline a headstone with a laugh track bolted on top. And you have to watch it happen in the same city where the Soviet Union bled out an entire generation, a Soviet officer's own hands ending the version of himself who was still telling everyone it was fine. His military background gives the writers cover to make this hit harder than it has any right to. Nikolai's dialogue is stitched through with real Eastern Front weight, a soldier who genuinely understands what it costs to survive a war that kills everyone around you and leaves you standing there anyway, alone with the counting. That grounding is what turns the wife jokes from slapstick into something closer to a man laughing at a funeral because the alternative is screaming. 9 wives is absurd on paper. 9 wives is unbearable once you realize the joke was load-bearing the entire time, holding up a person who otherwise had nothing left to stand on, nothing else keeping him upright. By the time the axe falls in Stalingrad, Nikolai is not just losing an alternate timeline of himself, he is watching the whole crew's real problem play out in miniature, staged in the one city built to make it unmissable. He is watching what a mad scientist built out of grief and vodka refused to die quietly, because staying that man meant staying a puppet forever, and some puppets fight to keep the strings, even when fighting means killing the version of themselves who stopped resisting. Drinking to forget is one way to serve a lie. But there is a man on this crew who served his lie with total sobriety, quoting honor and loyalty, right up until he had to behead the part of himself that believed it. Takeo Masaki. Takeo Masaki spends the entire war worshipping honor, and then honor makes him cut off his own head. Not metaphorically. He kneels down, draws a blade, opens his own body first, and only then does another version of himself finish the job. The man built entirely on Bushido discovers that his code of loyalty was pointed at a lie the whole time, and the only honorable move left is helping the version of himself who kept believing it complete a death he chose for himself. Takeo shows up first in Shi no Numa, an officer of the Imperial Japanese Army dropped into the same rotting swamp as the other 3 original members of the crew, where Tank curses and Nikolai drinks. Takeo quotes proverbs. He talks about fate. He talks about cycles repeating themselves like clockwork. For years he read as the stiff one, the samurai stereotype standing next to 3 louder, funnier men. The guy who says something ominous and then goes right back to reloading his rifle. That reading does not survive contact with his actual mission. Intel reveals Takeo was sent by his own government to investigate an alliance between Group 935 and Division 9, Japan's Parallel 115 program. He was not just a soldier standing around waiting for orders. He was an envoy. A spy watching one experiment group cut a deal with another, right up until the experiment swallowed him too. Same trap Nikolai fell into, just a different flag stitched onto the uniform. His original portrayal leaned hard into mystic samurai cliches, all haiku and hollow wisdom, the kind of character who exists mainly to sound wise next to men who are clearly losing their minds. His later version keeps the honor code but breaks it open, forcing Takeo to sit with what that code actually served the whole time. Loyalty to the Emperor sounds noble in a vacuum. It looks a lot worse once you learn what the Emperor's scientists were doing to people in Division 9's name, and worse still once you learn Takeo saw it firsthand and pushed back against it anyway. Zetsubu no Shima is where that gap collapses entirely. The rewritten Primus version of Takeo finds his old self imprisoned there, locked up not for some vague act of disrespect, but for actually opposing the unethical experiments he had originally been sent to investigate. He found what Division and Group 9 to 35 were doing behind closed doors, and he refused to look away from it. That refusal cost him his freedom, and Primus Takeo does not free him. He witnesses him complete seppuku, the old ritual of cutting into his own body to reclaim his honor, and then finishes the ceremony himself with a single stroke to the neck. A killing stage with full ceremony, like a man settling a debt instead of committing a murder. Compare that to a cryo chamber shutting off with a hiss. That was quiet, almost clinical. This is seppuku, followed by a blade. Deliberate and formal from the first cut to the last, nothing accidental about a single part of it. Nikolai needed a bottle to face what he'd lost. Takeo needed a sword and a code of conduct that could finally point at the right target. He is not looking for closure or comfort, and he is not doing any of it with pleasure. This is a soldier who spent his whole life certain that obedience was honor, discovering that the men above him had spent his loyalty on something monstrous, and paying for that discovery with the one ritual his culture gave him for exactly this kind of shame. That is the real trick of Takeo's writing. He was never actually the least interesting one of the group. He just read that way for years, right up until the story bothered to explain him. He was the character who had to figure out that honor without judgment is just obedience wearing a nicer word. His arc is not about becoming less rigid, not about loosening up or learning to laugh like the others eventually do. It is about aiming his rigidity at the right man for the first time in his life, and that man happens to be himself. And then there are the quotes. Takeo talks constantly about cycles that repeat, about fate that cannot be dodged, about corruption hiding inside things that look pure on the surface. Easy to write off as flavor text for a stoic warrior character, the kind of line you skip past on your way to the next round. Except by the time you have watched Nikolai drown his own reflection in a bottle and then watched Takeo end his own life on a blade, cycles stop sounding like poetry and start sounding like a description of the actual plot. Same shape, different man, again and again, like the story keeps drawing the same diagram with new names written on it. 3 men, 3 copies of themselves, locked away and waiting for someone to make a choice they never got to make. 3 separate rooms where the only way out was murder, dressed up in 3 completely different rituals depending on who was doing the killing. That is not coincidence, and it was never going to stop at 2. Edward Richthofen. Every chamber Dempsey ever walked into, every memory he lost, every reason Nikolai stopped trusting his own reflection, traces back to one German scientist who thought all 3 of them were disposable. That is not an exaggeration, that is the org chart. Edward Richthofen joined Group 935, and Group 935 is the reason any of this exists. Take away that one enlistment and there is no zombie outbreak, no wonder weapons, no missing decades, just a group of soldiers who never met each other. He is the one who figured out Element 115 could tear a hole in space itself. And instead of reporting that discovery to a superior like a normal employee with a normal amount of self-preservation, he started dragging soldiers through it. Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo. Test subjects, not comrades. He built the Pack-a-Punch. He built the wonder weapons. He built the entire machine that turns ordinary men into something that can survive the undead, and never once did he stop to ask if survival was even worth what it cost them. Dempsey's missing memories are not a side effect of some outbreak. They are Richthofen's paperwork, filed away and forgotten by everyone except the man who caused them. On the moon, that paperwork gets signed in blood. Richthofen uses the MPD to rip Samantha Maxis clean out of her own body and take it for himself, then helps launch a chain of missiles that wipes out the surface of the Earth. Billions of people. Gone. And he does it laughing. This is the version of Richthofen fans call Ultimus, and Ultimus Richthofen does not agonize over any of it, not for a second. He finds the apocalypse funny. That is the baseline. That is the man you are working with. Then a second version of him shows up and refuses to keep being that guy. Primus Richthofen, the one running around in Black Ops 2 and 3, spends entire timelines trying to break the very loop his other self built. In maps like The Giant and Der Eisendrache, he is not laughing anymore. He is quietly gathering the souls of Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, keeping them safe inside himself while pretending everything is fine. Same face, same voice, cheerfully cracking jokes about torture 1 minute and describing a vivisection in clinical detail the next like he's reading off a shopping list. completely different man, wearing him like a coat he never bothered to take off. That is the trick of Richthofen as a character. He can describe stabbing someone in the spine with the same tone he uses to make a joke about cheese. It should not work. It works because underneath the cartoon voice is a real scientist, genuinely brilliant, genuinely capable of building the very weapons the crew survives with, Iridi, and genuinely willing to burn 3 lives down just to prove a theory. That combination is what makes the chambers make sense. Somebody had to design a story where killing your own past self is the only way out, and it was never going to be a stable, reasonable person doing the designing. Blood of the Dead is where the bill comes due. One Richthofen dies just to keep the plan moving forward, and another has to step into the wreckage and finish the job he barely understands. By the time the ether itself starts collapsing, the man who once believed he could control teleportation, resurrection, and time is revealed to be exactly as powerless as Dempsey was, strapped to a table decades earlier. He unleashed forces bigger than his own genius, and in the end, those forces do not care that he was the one who started it. Genius does not get a refund. Whether that later Richthofen actually earns forgiveness for what Ultimus did is the most argued question in the entire fanbase. Some players see a genuine redemption, a man clawing his own soul back one map at a time, piece by piece, with nobody grading him on the attempt. Others see a franchise that let its villain rewrite the rules until his crimes became a tragic backstory instead of a body count. That debate stays open, and it probably never closes. What does not stay open is the causal chain. Every experiment, every reset, every version of this story funnels back through him, and no theory, no redemption arc, no amount of soul collecting changes that. So here is the shape of the whole thing. Dempsey did not lose his memories to zombies. Nikolai did not drown his guilt because of the undead. Takeo did not carry his shame because of some plague crawling out of the ground. They carry all of it because one man decided their bodies were laboratory equipment, and the only way any of them ever got free was by putting a bullet through the joke version of who they used to be. The zombies were never the real threat. They were the noise, a mad scientist experiment made while it was running in the background. Richthofen built the graveyard. Then he spent the rest of eternity digging through it, looking for the men he buried. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.